So why is a tankie driving a truck? Well, it's to make the point that the unsung heroes of the land effort so far have been the servicemen and servicewomen of the logistic corps, some of whom you'll see on this film. Most of these productions tend to concentrate on smart weapons, so as we approach the land battle, it's quite easy to forget that the fighting echelon goes nowhere without fuel, food, ammunition and water. And our morale wouldn't last very long either if it wasn't for the posties, for the cooks, for the field bakeries, the bath units and everybody else that's involved. The logistic effort on Op Granby is the biggest the British have undertaken since the war. Over the last 4 weeks, the Royal Corps of Transport on a single MSR have moved 30 million litres of fuel and 50,000 tonnes of stocks, ranging from Chinooks to gun barrels to boots, you name it, they've moved it. Now, in doing so, the logistic corps have met their targets absolutely bang on time in every case. Some of these trucks have done over 20,000 miles in the last 4 weeks and have been serviced some 6 times. So this introduction is to say well done and thank you to Craftsman Prosser, to driver Harper, to Private Higginbottom and her forklift truck, and to people like you. Well done and keep on trucking.
Okay, Charlie Fire Team, move!
This film clip shows the 1st Battalion of the Staffordshire Regiment conducting a live-fire amphibia exercise to practice and hone their skills at fighting in built-up areas.
Okay, push on! Stone.
Enemy dead! Window to my right! Window to my front!
Nico! Come on! Just go to the north of the building! G'day! Listen in! Nico! Yeah! Halsey! Yeah! Stop suppressing touchdown!
Right!
Sierra 3-0, this is Sierra 3-1, Charlie. Objective clear. Out.
The Staffordshire Regiment is an armoured infantry regiment equipped with the Warrior armoured fighting vehicle, which allows it to move in quickly on its objective, often in the company of tanks. But it is the rifle platoons that provide the main thrust of the regiment's attack, and it is the soldiers of the rifle platoons who may be called upon to fight through Iraqi positions, perhaps facing hand-to-hand combat to clear the Iraqi troops from the objective, so preparing the way for a further advance.
Get in, Bundy! Come on, Kelly, is the room clear? It's clear! One section, follow me! Let's go. Free one! Go well! Get some of the roof, Cam. Hey, one! Hey, Nico, go around the right-hand side of the building! Prepare to give covering fire! Mate! Over there! Wolsey! The White House! The White House! Right! Is there any more? Wolsey! Wolsey! Billy back! White rock calf. White rock calf, that's your objective. Wolsey, be aware! Push through now! Right! Chopped a bit. Right, see one's going into Hard Rock Coffee. As soon as you're in, 2-2 will go around the right. Right. Mark, give me a shout. Mark, give me a shout. Please switch foot. Yeah. Pass it, I'll relay to you, but. Right, space call up. Right, okay? Yeah. 4-3's only to Jordan. Grenade going off.
Baptism of fire. I've witnessed your suffering.
Let's go, Sergeant. Get ready, good. Okay, good. Ready, Fuzz? Yeah.
My brother.
Go. Fire inside. Sandbags down! Right, get these sandbags down, really yourself something to fire from! Come on then!
But we live in different worlds.
On me! Come out! Right, please. Stop, watch out here! Stop me! Okay. Down! Down! On me! Get ready for me. Get ready to go. Where we going? Fucking house. Come out. Yeah. Oh, God. Stop. Stop. Let's loose. Sergeant, get on me now! Come on! You stay in, we will go on this one. Let's go, Sarge! Everybody! Hey! Shut up, it's all right. Is that all of them? Can you get one call sign to push out as far as the village over there? Okay, just so there's no enemy on the deck. Right, lefty. We've got 3 guys left. Saunders over there, right? Tell him. You're backing up by him in overall command in your section. You're backing up by forward. Round the flank to the forward edge of this village, okay? Yeah, two ICs. Right, you have to leave your blokes.
You're right, Sergeant. Trying to kill him at the way. Trying to kill him.
Some of you soldiers.
Leon from Sweden. Hey.
Ready still.
Pull down if you want to. Yourself, Hale and Ballard, hold that front building, okay? Dominate to IC.
Hold on.
Hale. On, mate. Okay.
So we'll start going.
Right. Hale. Go with your Tim. Stop in. What's your arm?
Come on, get him down, mate.
And in the Gulf, as Allied forces prepare for a land war, a huge operation is going on behind the lines to keep the troops supplied and fed. Kate Adie is with the 1st British Armoured Division in northern Saudi Arabia.
Moving forward, hauling the supplies of war. The desert is a source of staggering statistics, with the British alone carrying over tens of thousands of tons of ammunition and 12 million litres of fuel. And 10 Regiment, Royal Corps of Transport, reckons to have equalled going to the moon and back 4 times.
You'll recall that we've got quite a number of trucks coming up in the loop from Jubail up the MSR into here.
Brigadier Martin White directs a never-ending flow of missiles, engine parts, bullets and bottled water. Just the ammunition lives in an area the size of a small town. The front line needs men, equipment, fuel, food, an army that has already consumed nearly 3 million eggs and 1,500 tons of potatoes, plus 12 goats for a small contingent of Gurkhas. And bread rolls by the thousand, a dozen bakers in a containerized kitchen dug into the sand.
We bake 8,000 on this shift, and the night shift bake 8,000, all done by hand. Beautiful, the best bread you can ever get.
Just 2 comparisons regarding the size of this operation. The airlift from Britain to Saudi Arabia is now bigger than the Berlin airlift of 40 years ago. And the logistics operation is greater than that for D-Day in World War II. This is Kate Adie with 1st Armoured Division in northern Saudi Arabia for the British Television News Pool.
It took a moment to focus on the incoming projectiles. There it goes. They came streaking past, following the same track. As you can see, that's the latest Tomahawk cruise missile to fly just over our position here. Anti-aircraft gunners all around us are trying to shoot them down. So far, 3 have flown over our heads, all heading for their targets, and I think there's some more coming in over here. The cruise missiles were map-reading themselves along this highway over the gauntlet of gunfire.
It was the 3rd and almost certainly the last day of these helicopter attack operations. The Iraqi ships have from the start been a constant threat to the Allied fleet, each ship capable of launching Exocet missiles from a range of 40 miles.
Who's ahead?
On this mission, the Lynx observer quickly found a radar contact ahead. Cameraman Eugene Campbell flew with the Lynx in this attack. It was his 3rd mission in 3 days.
Our radar picked up a small contact several miles away. We, with a lot of difficulty, visually identified it as a TNC-45. Very poor visibility because of a very hazy day, but we had a strong radar contact. We were given the weapons free. We went in, locked it, at the same time as he locked onto us, fired missiles and broke off. We sneaked back in just to confirm it was a hit, and it was later confirmed by Allied aircraft that it was a hit.
The Lynx also flew over the wreck of one of the 3 ships it had sunk on the 2nd day's attacks. This, a TNC-45, a missile carrier and patrol ship. An empty life raft was floating nearby, and life jackets too, which seems to confirm the ships were caught unprepared. It's been 3 days of very intensive and very thorough operations. Now it's over, and with it, the threat, we hope, of any Exocet attacks from the Iraqi small but very dangerous Navy. A few days ago, the Allies confirmed their air supremacy. With the sinking of these ships, they ruled the seas as well. Michael Nicholson with the British Television News team aboard HMS Gloucester in the Northern Gulf.
For these men, the war is over. Iraqi prisoners fished from the chill waters of the Gulf, exhausted and defeated, now aboard a US Navy ship. In total, 86 Iraqi sailors were captured after a sea battle with British and American warships in the northern Gulf. Though the Allied forces are highly sensitive about the filming of enemy prisoners.
The prisoners are being treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention, and there's no attempt to parade them before your cameras. We allowed you the opportunity from a distance to take some photography because we thought that was appropriate to document that we were humanely treating these people. And in fact, we saved them from a certain death tonight.
Some prisoners were still wet and shivering from their experience, though doctors said most were in good shape. Despite being blindfolded and hand-tied for security, the Iraqis expressed surprise at their treatment.
They expected to be beaten and abused, and actually we've treated their wounds and tried to take care of them, and they were rather surprised by that.
American and Kuwaiti interrogators believe some of the Iraqis were trying to flee to Iran to escape the Allied bombing of their naval bases.
Sure, they are losing the war, and they want to escape to save themselves and their weapons.
Some even carried papers from senior officers ordering them to head for Iran. Allied sources suggested this could mean Iraqi commanders working against their president. Certainly these men had been told by Saddam that the Americans would torture and kill them. Jeremy Thompson, News at 10 in the Gulf.
This town, which we have been asked and agreed not to name, stands at a crossroads. These days the traffic here is almost all military. The streets are full of soldiers wearing the uniforms of many nations. Egyptians come to buy cheap transistor radios, intent on catching up with the news. Kuwaiti soldiers asked me when the ground war would start. Across the street, men from a small Czechoslovak army chemical decontamination unit passed by. Away from the town, in a secret location, a tented prisoner of war camp has been set up. Locals say it already has Iraqi inmates, but there's room for many more. West of the town, past Kuwait itself, convoys make their way along a road which runs along the Iraqi border. Helicopters fly low along the highway in the poor visibility. Ahead, a Hercules transport appears in the sandstorm. The American Army is now building up in areas so remote that they've had to construct their own airstrips. And a few moments ago, this road became an airfield. Handlers unloaded the aircraft as quickly as they could, and a few minutes later, it took off. The outloading of supplies continues despite the dangers on this narrow, overused highway. Mark Urban, BBC News, near the Iraqi border.
The next clip shows the results of recent Allied air attacks.
gain on this one. Come on, down with the gain.
It's about too much with it.
And loosen the picky. That's better. That's better. Come on, track that building.
See his bombs.
What's that?
I see his bombs flying.
Okay, laser firing. Mark on the building. Come on, get back on there.
That's it.
Right, going to try and near side face for impact.
Thanks, that.
Near side face for call me a time, Bill.
Okay, you've got 20 seconds.
Okay. We're going near the overhead, bollocks.
Stand by for play. Visual. 7.
Call me a time.
Got 10 seconds to go.
2, 6, check. Okay. Come on.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Should impact.
Yeah, start them going.
Good.
Okay, let's go home.
We've been here in Saudi Arabia now for nearly 3.5 months. Originally we started off working at headquarters BAA with 7th Brigade. We're the first brigade to deploy, obviously. And since then we've moved on to the DAA. Today, my job is packet commander of the 1st Packet BAA, which is moving with all the div troops assets here and about to move through the breach.
Breaching the Iraqi defences will be the essential first part in any ground attack that the Allies may be called upon to make. For the British, the Royal Engineers will employ a variety of techniques to clear the obstacles that Saddam Hussein's men have put in the path of the 1st Armoured Division. It may look like an airborne garden hose, but the giant Viper's explosion will clear a 200-metre path through an Iraqi minefield. Fascines may be used to fill in the trenches that the Iraqis have dug as obstacles to advancing armour. We joined 1 Armoured Division for the recent major breaching exercise, in which the whole division practised what will have to take place if and when a ground offensive is called for. This would almost certainly take place at night to take advantage of the cover of darkness. The Divisional Admin Area, or DAA, under command of Lieutenant Colonel Alan Taylor, was the last element of 1 Armoured Division to pass through the breach that had been made during the previous night. Colonel Taylor reminded his subordinate commanders to explain carefully to their men where they fitted into the bigger picture.
A lot of them are concerned we're just driving around the desert. Give them the scenario. The brigades have gone through. They've gone through the breach. They've broken out. They're now on advance to contact, and the logistic tail is following the division through the breach. All right? If they don't see it in context, they won't get anything out of it. Okay. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alan Taylor, RAOC. I'm the commanding officer of 3 Ordnance Battalion, which is a supply battalion supporting 1 Armoured Div. I'm also the commander of the Divisional Administrative Area. When I deployed originally on Op Granby, I was the commander of the Brigade Admin Area supporting 7th Brigade. Now that that's grown with the addition of 4th Brigade, I'm commanding the DAA. The DAA is a collection of small units who have to be pulled together and controlled for defense, NBC reporting purposes, and for movement. And all in all, we're now up to about 170 vehicles and about 500 men and women. And we are now following the main body, the F echelons, the fighting troops of the division, through the breach on this exercise to simulate the movement across the desert, through the border, and through the obstacle behind the border.
As the divisional admin area awaited its turn to clear the breach at the rear of the division, some found the time to be passing slowly. Others were more inventive.
Jump up and down a bit. Turtles in the desert. Shot to shit. Turn right. Don't look at the back. Will we get fined? They don't know who it is. Take the course on the line.
It is no secret that when the time comes, the artillery intends to give the Iraqis a pounding. Saddam Hussein's guns are huge in number and not underestimated by the British. With new ammunition, greater mobility, and the ability to direct fire more specifically, give confidence to men like the Sussex gunners. 2-6 Field Regiment Royal Artillery has only recently arrived in Saudi Arabia, but is already nearing positions where it could strike effectively at the Iraqis. And although everything here is on a vast scale, the gunners predict a massive artillery battle. The likely effect on Iraqi troops summed up by the man who has to plan and direct the British artillery bombardment.
It will be terrifying to a degree that is hard to imagine. I've not experienced artillery fire close to, except well dug in the bunker, looking through several inches of armor-plated glass. I find that pretty frightening. To anybody who's got less than that degree of protection, as anybody in the battlefield will have, will find it extremely frightening.
The Sussex gunners have had to acclimatise quickly, for across the desert, the sound of practice firing is being joined by the actual noise of war. The gunners are now in positions where, like us, they can hear the thud of explosions north of the border as the Allied air attacks continue day and night without let-up. If the Iraqis endure the bombings, then they'll have to face much greater punishment when the artillery gets going. This is Kate Adey with 1st Armoured Division in Saudi Arabia.
We are finally at war with Iraq, and the Royal Navy is playing its part to the full. The Type 42 destroyers, Her Majesty's ships Cardiff and Gloucester, are operating in positions far forward in the Persian Gulf, using their Sea Dart guided missile system to provide air defence for the Allied task groups, which continue to launch airstrikes by aircraft and cruise missile against Iraqi military positions. The ship's high-speed Lynx helicopters have been very involved in the anti-surface warfare role by searching for the Iraqi missile-armed OSA-class fast patrol boats. There have been no engagements as of today, 23rd of January, but the Lynx helicopters have allowed friends and neutrals to be identified so that enemy vessels may be singled out. From time to time, the aircraft from HMS Gloucester and HMS Cardiff have been augmented by a Lynx from HMS London. HMS London herself continues to escort the hospital ship RFA Argus. The Argus is carrying out her role as a primary casualty receiving station. She lies in readiness for any casualties from the carrier battle groups, but is also able to provide support to shore-based units who are within range of the Sea Kings of 846 Naval Air Squadron. The Royal Marines bandsmen embarked on the Argus are training for their war role as stretcher bearers and orderlies. The resupply of the Navy's forward units takes place by a RAS, a replenishment at sea. The Royal Fleet Auxiliary tankers and stores ships provide a service very similar to that being provided by the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and the Royal Corps of Transport on the main supply route ashore. HMS Brazen, in conjunction with other Allied warships, provides an escort for this daily stores shuttle run. The Brazen's 2 Lynx helicopters, an Exocet and Seawolf missile systems provide a formidable defensive capability for the resupply ships, as well as an offensive capability when called upon. The countering of the threat of Iraqi mines is yet another Royal Naval responsibility. Her Majesty's ships Atherstone, Cattastock and Herworth continue their mine countermeasures operations as reported in Operation Granby Video Review No. 1, but have now been joined by Her Majesty's ships Ledbury and Dulverton. They work closely with their American counterparts and are poised and ready to tackle the Iraqi mine threat whenever and wherever it may arise, using their sonars to detect the mines and their PAPs, or clearance divers, to neutralize the threat. The other Royal Naval ships protect themselves from the Iraqi Special Forces saboteurs by regularly using their teams of ship's divers to carry out underwater searches of the ship's hulls by day or by night. The divers are also able to report back on the state of the underwater fittings, so that repairs can be carried out before the problems get too big. The following series of film clips show Allied airstrikes on Iraqi military targets and are used in post-strike target analysis.
Nose bombs away. Impact point is steady. 15 seconds. Impact point is steady.
Nice and easy on the turn. Stand by for designate.
Galaxy right-hand turn. Outbound. Galaxy, that's right-hand turn. Outbound. Designate. Roger.
Watch how much you turn it.
Copy. Okay.
It's gone. The lights are on. Okay, sight on steering. Big steering.
Okay, altitude 30.
Come sir. 6 speed. Speed is 470. They're shooting guns, but more we lose a little snot out of them though.
241. Oh, that's not it.
Yeah, this is, it's falling way behind us.
Yeah, good.
Picture clear.
How high up does it look there, Skipper?
Oh, it's below us.
Well, I mean for our wingman.
Second set of explosions. Guns are going off all over the place. Tight hag. I shooting too.
Precisely. Okay. I need to be able to top the ground speed here.
Man, I'll unfreeze the data for you.
Okay.
That sharp's coming off.
These pictures are taken through the nose cone of a precision-guided munition, a PGM, as it seeks out and finally acquires and locks onto its target. PGMs are allowing for the surgical elimination of Iraqi military targets. The busy port of Al Jubail on Saudi Arabia's eastern coast, and until recently home to 10 Regiment RCT Group, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Philip Treganis.
Hat floppy ridiculous. The ruling for the wearing of the hat is on the head with the brim all the way down, all the way round, all of the time.
The regiment arrived in the Gulf in October in support of 7 Armoured Brigade, and apart from moving combat supplies, were responsible for the reception of the brigade, which commenced in Shed 4. The regiment also established and ran the now famous Baldrick Lines, which started life as Tent City. In those days, if you saw a queue, you joined it, for you never knew what you might be able to get to eat, be issued with, or be able to purchase. As a third-line transport regiment, it has been 10 Regiment RCT Group's job to move combat supplies and other materials needed for future operations forward along the very busy main supply route into the divisional area, by day or by night. Here the loads are handed over to a second-line transport regiment who supply the brigades and battle groups. The regiment are now moving just about anything, anywhere and at any time, and usually to the right place. They have made great use of the new demountable rack offloading and pickup system, thankfully called drops for short, to transport water or fuel in the ubiquitous bean can, or thousands of palletized loads, and literally hundreds of ISO containers. The commanding officer's O Group, on the final stage of the outload of one armoured division to its forward area, was taking place when we arrived to spend some time with the regiment.
Daily meeting will be cancelled, and it will be a daily conference call on time. G1 BTRs, the
Meanwhile, the regiment prepared to vacate its temporary home at the Reziat camp Al-Jubail for the long haul to re-establish itself in the forward force maintenance area, where it would carry on its role, as in BAOR, of delivering combat supplies and other materiel to the back door of the division.
Hello, Sultans. The start timings, can I just confirm the first serial convoy credit number, please? 0600 start time is 21 UKF stroke 01 stroke 50, and then it runs on from there. Okay, thank you. Thanks for finishing it.
Halfway along the busy main supply route is about the right place to pull in to what the soldiers have called the Happy Eater, but as Major Andy Anderson explains, is more correctly called an Admin Harbour Area, or AHA.
I was tasked nearly 3 weeks ago to come and set up an Admin Harbour Area, an AHA, which is where we are now. We're approximately halfway along the MSR, the main supply route, which is the route used to take all the supplies forward, ready for future operations. I've got two main functions. One is to support my squadron and my squadron vehicles who are going through on the loop. Just to explain the loop, that's a 700-kilometre journey from the point where the vehicles pick up the loads through to where they drop the loads off and then back again to the start. And we're situated approximately halfway along that loop. And it's my remit to provide support for the vehicles and the crews as they go through the loop.
Well, I'm Driver Freeman from 17th Squadron, 10 Regiment RCT, and I help run this location at the present moment.
How long have you been here for now?
In this present location for almost 3 weeks now.
Where did you come out from?
From Port Jebal. Originally was in Bielefeld, 10 Regiment.
Okay. What have you got for breakfast?
This is bacon burgers, eggs and beans, the original Army breakfast.
The original Op Granby Army breakfast?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
showers, and all the rest of the things that go on in the HA. It's a 24-hour business, and we're running on squadron strength, which is very demanding.
Up at the Forward Force Maintenance Area, the FFMA, the regiment's headquarters squadron had spent the previous 3 weeks busily preparing for the regiment's arrival.
Let the CO go up next to the tent now, all right? Straight up by the end tent.
The defences that were to protect the regiment had been constructed under the watchful eye of HQ Squadron Sergeant Major Vaughan.
We were detached 21 days ago from Reziat, which is by Port Jebal, to come forward on behalf of 10 Regiment and set up a DP. We arrived in about 9 o'clock in the evening, dark, and it was raining. We woke up next morning not quite sure what was ahead of us, and when we did get up, it was just open desert. We were then told by FFMA to go out and form our defences with the aid of Sergeant Swain, Royal Marines, who was our advisor, and we set about the task. We realised very quickly that we had very little resources. So as you can see, what you see in front of you now are the resources we went around the other units and asked, could we borrow from you, and we will loan what we have from ourselves to you. And in fact, Sergeant Swain, with the help of just 19 men, have put up the defences you see for Support Squadron today, in readiness for the regiment arriving, which they are doing now.
heard talk about cutting back on the tail in favour of the teeth. Operation Granby, like Op Corporate before it, shows that it can be harmful and misleading to try and separate the two. Logistics often determine what can and cannot be done in war. It was Sir Winston Churchill that said, "Victory is the beautiful bright-coloured flower. Transport is the stem without which it could never have blossomed." 10 Regiment RCT Group has been and will remain a key link in the logistics supportive tale. The next piece of film, which has been made available to us by ITN, shows the recent attacks on Riyadh by Scud missiles and demonstrates how the Patriots have dealt with them.
And disappears into the dark, seeking out a Scud. Then there is silence, no explosion. Then a burning trail of something falling to earth. Whatever it is, the impact is a violent one. Watch for the burst of flame as it strikes the ground.
You'll be aiming at you in 2 seconds. Swinging back left.
Well, somewhere in that wasteland behind me is indeed the carcass of the fallen missile. Impossible to say where. In fact, the authorities have given up even looking just for the moment. What is safe to say is that this particular Scud attack has done no harm in Riyadh. But this morning, the smouldering remains of this building served as a vivid reminder that no defensive system is infallible. 1 man died, 30 others were injured, and had the building been occupied, the cost would have been greater. As the clean-up operation began, so did the questions. How did the Scud missiles get past the Patriot defensive system, which until then had dealt with everything fired at the cities of Saudi Arabia? The answer from the authorities is that the Patriot system is not infallible. It's not impossible to break through. Sometimes missiles will strike the city, but it remains true that because of this system, the impact of the Scud on the war is minimal. Peter Allen, ITN, Riyadh.
Just before 4 o'clock this morning, the sirens wailed. Several Patriot missiles defending the city rose lazily into the air. Riyadh was under attack for the second time in 2 days.
Keep on the horizon as well, keep the thing in, because there's more coming out. This explosion.
Then, and it's hard to be sure, 2 Patriot missiles seemed to collide. Then came the first interception, followed by a huge flash. And 10 seconds later, the sound in the distance of a big explosion. In the streets below, the reason was soon clear. In the middle of a main road lay the remains of Saddam's latest attempt to terrorize Riyadh. The 9-meter-long smoking remains of the Ariel battle. It fell to earth without causing any casualties or damage, not even to the roadway. This is one of the Scud missiles just shot down by Patriot missiles over Riyadh. As you can see, it's still smoking. There's no sign of the warhead. I'm told it would have been about 75 kilograms. It's probably an Al Hussein. That's a modification of the Scud with an extended range, fired from somewhere in southern Iraq or Kuwait. As dawn broke, a forklift truck hoisted up the Scud to take it away for closer examination. Like all the other Scud attacks so far, this missile was carrying a high explosive charge, not a chemical warhead. At 7:20, there was another alert, but no attack here. The threat to the capital is still very much there, and everyone is grateful for the efficiency of the Patriot missiles. Sandy Gore, ITN, Riyadh.
Kuwaiti flag flies again, and Kuwait City is free. As the Iraqis fled, reporters got into the city ahead of the troops.
Everywhere the evidence of 40 days and 40 nights of war and the destruction of the Iraqi army. troop carriers and light tanks destroyed. The turret tops hurriedly left open. An ambulance riddled by shell fire. Further on, an Iraqi army lorry abandoned. A column of Allied vehicles headed north in pursuit of an Iraqi army under fire from helicopters and planes. Many Iraqis didn't make it. Most Kuwaitis aren't.
I think at least 1 year.
Do you have any maps for them?
We have from our intelligence sources, and also we got some maps from the Iraqi surrender.
Beside the road, trenches filled with crude oil. On the lip of them, incendiary bombs. The Iraqis didn't have time to set them off. At times, smoke from oil wells set alight by the Iraqis blackened the midday sun as if there was an eclipse. All along the road north were vast convoys of Allied forces stopped in their tracks because of the Iraqis' sudden withdrawal. We reached Kuwait City after 7 hours. This was the route along which most of Saddam's forces tried to escape the night before last. How far oil-rich Kuwait has fallen under the Iraqis. This morning, its citizens, who now lack electricity, were eagerly filling petrol cans from an abandoned Iraqi army tanker. But citizens are trying to come to grips with their new freedom.
We are not happy since...
Joy and relief today. The scars are everywhere.
It was easy to find Kuwait City. The huge columns of smoke from hundreds of ruptured oil wells led the way like black marker posts to the outskirts of the city. And encircling Kuwait, the abandoned Iraqi defensive line, each position marked by burnt-out Iraqi armor. Hundreds of tanks were destroyed along this line alone. Their broken barrels sighted across advancing elements of the Marines' 1st Division. And those tanks that moved out from their prepared positions were immediately targeted. And early this morning, they started streaming through, the vanguard of the Saudi and Kuwaiti forces entering the city. It had long ago been agreed that the honor of liberating the capital would fall to them. And to greet them, the people of Kuwait, who'd been freed from 7 months of virtual house arrest. What started as a military convoy ended in the city center as a victory parade. And this time, the gunfire was in celebration. There were many reunions today. One young Kuwaiti soldier meeting his friends for the first time. Each with his own story of life.
Soldiers seemed pathetically anxious to give themselves up. By the end, 175,000 had surrendered. Neil Bennett reports.
The gestures, the pleading and the fear of soldiers demoralized in the face of overwhelming odds.
You're all right. You're all right. Okay? You're all right. You're all right.
For months, home has been a trench in the desert. For weeks, bombs have rained down day and night, depriving them of sleep, food, and now hope. So these 4 are no longer Iraqi combat troops, but prisoners of war of the American Marines. First, the formalities. A search for weapons and the discovery of name, rank and number. The Iraqi front line, in this sector at least, put up no resistance, and the Marines have taken thousands of prisoners. Many had with them the leaflets dropped by Allied aircraft, calling on them to surrender or face starvation and certain death. Some didn't have the chance to surrender, and the Americans are burying Iraqi dead on the battlefield.
This man was killed during an Allied air attack, apparently trying to get supplies through to his companions. They were in desperate need of them.
It was just a mixture of rice and a little bit of water, a whole bowl of rice that was in his quarters.
Enough to feed a company?
No. Yeah, the POWs that we have right now, they said they haven't eaten in over 2 days.
It advanced thousands upon thousands of Iraqi prisoners. Most had surrendered willingly, thankful to have survived the war. All were checked and processed before being fed, for some their first good meal in days. The wounded received immediate treatment. As they gave themselves up, some were in tears, others grateful, most relieved. Saddam's hollow claims of victory were no longer shared by men finally out of reach of his regime of fear.
They hate it. You don't think... no one supports Saddam. No one supports them, except those people who get advantage of him. You know? No one supports him, but no one can say anything. Because if he say anything, he will be in a bad position.
The word of Saddam's withdrawal had done nothing to halt the Allies' momentum as they pressed on towards Kuwait City. Though this convoy of Saudi armored troops still weaved their way carefully through the Iraqi minefields. By now, the advance was relentless, this huge army almost unstoppable, now that their final objective was almost within sight. But the firefights continued in many places along the 300-mile battlefront. Allied artillery engaged a number of defiant Iraqi units. These American Marines were still taking heavy incoming fire. But the Marines were also busy blasting away at empty Iraqi foxholes. Time and again they found deserted bunkers where Iraqi soldiers had fled in the face of the Allies' lightning attacks.
The size of the enemy forces have been right where we expected them to be, with the morale, relatively low morale of what we expected. So we expected to get some fight, which we have. We've gotten some mortar fire, some automatic weapons fire, some tank fire, but very little of that. And like I said, we're just overpowering them right now with, I think, speed and surprise.
As the Allies ploughed forward in an endless dust cloud, there was a confidence, almost a cockiness about their advance into Iraq. Heading up towards the Euphrates Valley, a vast fleet of attack helicopters, leapfrogging the ground troops and flying on 100 miles into Iraq. They met little resistance as they tried to cut off Saddam's supply routes. This huge outflanking maneuver deceived the Iraqis and allowed Allied tanks to take on units of the Republican Guard who'd been sucked into a valley close to the Kuwaiti border. With warplanes providing cover and another angle of attack, the Iraqi armor was driven back. Military sources reported over 270 tanks had been neutralized. In the shadow of the burning oil wells, Saddam's army lies derelict. 200 tanks were destroyed in one day by the British 1st Division as they swept into Iraq. But they lost 13 soldiers killed, 9 of them by an American aircraft.
With Iraqi forces in retreat, the British Armoured Division fought on into the night, determined to press home their advantage. The battlefield, southern Iraq. Until a few hours earlier, Iraqi troops had held this area of desert. Now British armour was sweeping through. The coalition forces meeting little resistance. British tanks and artillery pounding Saddam Hussein's armour and infantry as they withdrew into the darkness. The speed, mobility and firepower of the British and American armoured divisions has been at the heart of the Allied strategy to defeat Saddam's army. British tanks here employing tactics used successfully in the desert battles of the Second World War, giving the enemy no time to respond before the battleground changes and new positions come under fire. latest technology also giving the Allies a vital edge.
Fighting at night like this, the British have a distinct advantage. Using their superior night fights, they can see and stricken enemies before becoming a target themselves.
For the British in their tanks and armoured personnel carriers, the long night's fighting came after a day in which they'd suffered their first casualties. But for the moment there was no time to mourn friends killed or injured in the previous day's battle. It was gone 4 o'clock in the morning before the guns fell silent. Then an opportunity for 2 or 3 hours sleep for some. Time to refuel vehicles that had driven through the previous day and night in pursuit of their enemy. Sentries posted around the new British position with the warning that not all Iraqi soldiers were giving up without a fight. For many young soldiers, this was the time to come to terms with the reality of war. Friends hurt or lost. The vehicles destroyed in the fighting were warrior personnel carriers like this one. This man was one of the survivors from a vehicle in which many of his friends died.
I heard first explosion. We moved about 30 metres away in the wagon, waiting for the guns to be blown. And there was just a mass explosion which blew us back in the turret. And then when we looked out and seen the wagon had been hit, we moved round in front of the wagon.